The Venezuelan opposition has vowed to forcibly bring tons of humanitarian aid, donated by the United States, from Colombia into Venezuela on Saturday. President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela has been in a standoff for weeks with political opponents, who question the legitimacy of his election to a second term in office. That standoff has reached a head with a disagreement over whether to allow tons of humanitarian aid, donated mostly by the United States, into Venezuela across the Colombian border. Mr. Maduro has refused the aid. But his opponents, led by Juan Guaido, who drew international support when he declared himself Venezuela's interim president last month, have vowed to forcibly bring in the supplies on Saturday. Getting the aid in would be a symbolic victory for the opposition, and signal Mr. Maduro's loosening grip on power. The aid, including food and medicine, is desperately needed in Venezuela, where conditions have grown steadily worse in recent months. Inflation has skyrocketed, hunger is endemic, and hospitals are without medicine. More than 3 million people have fled the country, many on foot, sparking a regional migration crisis. Just after dawn in the Venezuelan border town of Arania, locals defied the orders of the government and tried to storm a closed footbridge to Colombia, hoping to make way for humanitarian aid to pass through. Members of the Venezuela National Guard fired tear gas on the group as they attempted to remove fencing and barriers blocking the bridge. The standoff between stone-throwing bare-chested youth, many with their faces covered, and lines of military police was reminiscent of the large-scale waves of anti-government protests that gripped the country in 2014 and 2017, which left hundreds of people dead. Opposition leaders, who had planned an organized march, said this is not what they wanted. The opposition leader, Mr. Guaido, posted on Twitter that several members of the National Guard assigned to the Simón Bolívar International Bridge that connects Venezuela and Colombia have joined the opposition. He posted a video showing 3 men wearing Venezuelan military police uniforms being escorted by a police officer on the Colombian side of the border. They have decided to stand on the side of the people and the Constitution, he wrote in another tweet. Welcome. The arrival of freedom and democracy to Venezuela is already unstoppable. As security forces on Friday fired on a group of indigenous Venezuelans, who were protesting near the border with Brazil against Mr. Maduro's decision to block aid. At least 2 civilians were killed and more than a dozen wounded in the confrontation in the Gran Sabana area, according to Americo de Grazia, an opposition lawmaker from the state of Bolívar. The Gran Sabana area is inhabited by the Pemen, an indigenous community. Ricardo Delgado, a Pemen leader, said the tensions that led to the confrontation began in the early morning when a military convoy tried to reach a checkpoint on the border as reinforcement. A group of indigenous protesters blocked their passage. The convoy left but later returned and the military began shooting at the protesters. Later in the day, Mr. de Grazia and another opposition lawmaker, Olivia Lozano, said the head of Bolívar's National Guard force, Gen. José Miguel Montoya Ramirez, along with a few deputies, were seized by indigenous leaders. The lawmakers said in interviews that it was unclear how long the indigenous leaders intended to detain the general and his deputies. For days, the humanitarian aid has been stockpiled on the Colombian side of the border with Venezuela, warehoused near a bridge in the major border town of Cúcuta. The Venezuelan authorities have blocked lanes on the bridge with tanker trucks to prevent the aid from being brought across. 2 competing concerts have added to the dramatic scene. On Friday morning, thousands of Venezuelans streamed across footbridges to Cúcuta to attend the opposition-supported Venezuela Live Aid concert organized by the billionaire Richard Branson. The event was aimed at raising money for food and medical supplies. The presidents of Colombia, Chile and Paraguay attended the concert, rallying support for the opposition and calling for an end to Mr. Maduro's presidency. Maduro is part of the problem and not part of the solution, President Sebastián Piñera of Chile told the crowd. Democracy is the solution for Venezuela. Despite the potential for a showdown and a strong military presence, the atmosphere in the towns bordering Cúcuta was somewhat festive on Friday. Meanwhile, Mr. Maduro's government has plans to stage rival concerts over the weekend on the Venezuelan side of the border. Government officials declined to name any of the artists who would perform, saying only that 140 musical acts will be present. Buses of government supporters arrived in the area for the events. Unlike similar government-sponsored events in recent years, the buses were only partially filled, underlining the government's struggle to mobilize supporters.